Hello there. More drink? Good morning, Kathy. Good to see you here. I'm going to go ahead and start. Folks can catch up on the replay or later on. Chapter 5 is called How Did I Get Here? I think we ended last time we ended in chapter 4 with Clay Clark saying that when he saw a miracle, he would believe in God. Because we found out that Clay Clark, who we love, didn't believe in God or at the time, or believing God would do what he could do. And he said, when I see a miracle, I'll begin to believe it. And we said, little did he know that what he was asking for at that time. So here we go. Chapter 5. I am going to read only half of it because it's like 25 pages long. I'm going to read about 10, 12 pages, and then we'll read the other half tomorrow. It starts out, during this crazy life schedule, I became pregnant, and my due date with our second baby was quickly approaching. Our first child's birth had been induced around my due date because of a problem with the placenta. I wanted this labor to be different. I really wanted to wait until my body began labor naturally for two reasons. One, I wanted to experience spontaneously going into labor. And two, I believe that if my body had not started to go into labor on its own, God didn't want the baby to come yet. I wanted to have God make the decision about when our son would arrive, not me. I felt like I would be forcing something that wasn't supposed to happen yet, and I didn't want to do that. My husband knew that my feelings on the situation, but due to the crazy work schedule he currently had, there was no way to ensure that Clay could be present for our son's birth other than to schedule it. So all work and schedule arrangements were made, and labor was induced early the morning of April 23rd, 2007. Aubrey Napoleon Hill Clark was born at 3:30 p.m., weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces and measuring 19 and a quarter inches long. That's a big boy. He was perfect. Aubrey and I both checked out well, and 2 days later we returned home from the hospital. Clay and I were excited to have another baby and a son at that. Now we had a daughter and a son. I was so happy that Clay was able to provide so that I could stay home full time raising our new baby boy and daughter. Making this possible, Clay went back into his rigorous work schedule, which had improved somewhat, and for the first time, the company and its employees moved into genuine office space. We downsized to a much smaller home, but I didn't mind. It was a home just for us for the first time since we had gotten married 6 years earlier. It was surreal. I had a 100% private home for just our family. I was ecstatic that I no longer had to share our home with random DJs who worked with my husband. With our first child, Havana, I had been a typical first-time mom. I was overly protective and couldn't stand to ever hear Havana cry. If she cried day or night, whatever the reason, I nursed her. As a result, she hadn't learned to settle herself to sleep. She was dependent on me to nurse her to sleep. As a result, we let her sleep with us. This lasted for almost a year when I finally had to move her into her own bed because I could no longer deal with the lack of sleep due to her waking throughout the night, needing her human pacifier, which was me. Moving Havana to her own bed and adopting a new sleep routine was traumatic. Probably more so for me than for her. I felt terrible listening to her cry from her room, from her crib. At this moment, she was old enough to stand and cry, "Mom!" I would check in on her, and she was physically okay, but she was mad. It took a good week of this new routine until the crying subsided and Havana embraced her new bedtime reality. Learning from this valuable experience, I vowed that the next time I would do things differently. A book had been recommended to me by my Aunt Karen called On Becoming Baby Wise. I read it and knew I had to implement its strategies. I greatly valued my Aunt Karen's advice on the subject as she had raised 4 kids of her own, and the extended family had always been amazed at what great sleepers they all were. She could easily go out and have sitters put her children down without a struggle. They could take family trips, and bedtimes were not a battle. Babies did not need to be laid with, nor were they dependent on being rocked or nursed only to rouse sometime in the night and need to have the process repeated in order to fall back asleep. What really sold me on the book was the fact that my aunt claimed she had never had to go through the initial cry yourself to sleep process with any of her kids in order to reach these enviable results. She simply implemented the book's sleep strategies from the day her babies came home from the hospital. That way, there were no unwanted habits created that she would later need to break. The baby was simply trained with the desired sleep habits from the beginning. Upon Aubrey's arrival, I immediately put to use the strategies that the book recommended. Aubrey was a great nurser, and the schedule worked well. He was able to peacefully settle himself to sleep in his bassinet, and soon was sleeping through the night. However, when Aubrey was awake, he seemed to be somewhat of a needy baby. Our first child, Havana, had been a happy, easygoing baby, other than the whole sleeping debacle. Early on, she was content just to lie on her back and take in the sights and sounds as we would set up baby toys all around her. She would be situated on her back, flailing her arms and legs as she cooed. Aubrey could not have been any more different. He was very attracted to me and never wanted to be put down. If he was set down, he cried immediately. It didn't matter what was set up to entertain him, he had no interest. He just loved to be held. I believe he did well with his bed since he had been conditioned since birth to sleep in it. I imagine he easily recognized the familiar feel and smell of his sheets, as well as the noise of music and the fan, and associated these cues with going to sleep. As the weeks of Aubrey's life progressed, we noticed his eyes constantly moved. He seemed to continually assess the environment around him. He never stopped looking around. We were amazed at his interest in his surroundings, his desire to just take everything in. The movement in Aubrey's eyes was so obvious that the guys at the office lovingly referred to him as Scantron, because Aubrey's eyes unceasingly scanned the room back and forth, back and forth. I didn't remember exactly when babies start to make eye contact, but I knew from previously having a baby that it doesn't happen right away. It takes a little bit of time. I honestly had no concern about Aubrey's health in any way. Soon Aubrey went into his 2-month well baby doctor's checkup. It was an uneventful visit, an expected formality consisting of brief questions, an exam, and a heart-wrenching shot. Then we were back in our daily routine. Life had settled down. I loved the peaceful seclusion of our new home. We had adjusted to life with our new baby. At this point, daily life involved me holding Aubrey for a majority of the time as I went about our activities. The notable exceptions were driving in the car when he was content riding in his car seat carrier, being carried in his carrier various places, and when he was napping or sleeping peacefully in his crib. Outside of these times, if Aubrey was not physically held, he would get upset and begin crying. There is a specific instance in which I remember I had scheduled to have a mole removed. I took both kids with me to the appointment like I usually did. Aubrey was probably about 2.5 months old at the time. He had been peaceful in the carrier car seat in which I had brought him to the office. As we waited our turn to be called back for our appointment, Aubrey got antsy and I got him out of his carrier to hold him. Of course, he was perfectly content being held in my arms. We were soon called back and settled into a room. I continued to hold Aubrey as we waited for the doctor's arrival. When it came time for the procedure to take place, I had to place Aubrey back in his infant car seat as I couldn't hold him while I underwent the procedure. Any other baby in his age probably would have been happy to be placed in a car seat where he could sit, observe the action, and be entertained by his older sister for the 5 minutes that was needed to remove the mole. However, Aubrey, upon leaving my arms, immediately started to scream. Not a cry like you would expect from most babies when they are upset, but screaming. He was wailing inconsolably to the point where nurses came into the exam room just to pick him up and hold him as I lay helpless to comfort him across the room on an exam table. Despite the nurses' soft, soothing words and warm embrace, they were unable to console him. The outcry continued even though I was no more than 4 feet away from him. I kept saying, "I'm right here. Mommy is right here, Aubrey." I looked on as the nurses tried to talk to him and bounce him in their arms, all to no avail. The 5 minutes I was unable to hold Aubrey felt like an eternity as we endured his cries. The moment I was released, I rushed over, and the nurse holding him politely and I'm sure thankfully passed him to me. He quickly settled himself, comforted to be in my arms. I felt terrible. I was so embarrassed that my son had screamed the whole time, and neither I nor anyone had been able to console him. I felt terrible for my son that he was so upset. Not knowing anything at this point about Aubrey's being completely unable to see, I just figured he was highly attached to his mom. I had always been told that every child is different, and sons usually have a greater attachment to their mothers than daughters do. I now believe that this was exactly the case with my son, or clearly the case with my son. About the time Aubrey was reaching 3 months of age, I planned to attend my brother Adam's wedding in Utah. Adam is an older brother to Justin and me, yet we never knew him until we were in high school. My parents had given him up for adoption years before they got married, as my mom had him when he was only 16 years old and knew she would be unable to provide the care that he needed. I had known about my older brother for as long as I can remember. I remember every year my mom crying on October 15th, Adam's birthday, and telling us never to have sex until we were married because it had resulted in her having to give up her baby. She wanted us to never to have to go through something like that. She had said giving up her baby was the hardest thing she had ever done, yet she knew it was the right thing to do. Anyway, my mom and Adam came into contact about the time that I was in high school, and shortly after that, we met him. Meeting Adam for the first time was weird. He looked exactly like a darker version of my brother Justin, yet he had a completely different personality. Where Justin and I had always been quiet, passive, and reserved, Adam was funny and outgoing. My brother and Adam seemed to bond instantly. They were brothers, and that in and of itself was exciting to them. Also, both excelled in athletics, so that was an instant connection point. Although I love my brother and I was excited to meet him, we didn't seem to have any shared activities, interests, or values, so we failed to form any kind of meaningful bond. Because of Clay's crazy work schedule, he wasn't able to attend the wedding with me as he DJ'd weddings himself every weekend. But my brother, dad, mom, and many of my aunts and uncles would attend. I was excited to go to the wedding, but I hated the idea of traveling without Clay and missing him that weekend. I was so grateful to have my brother Justin traveling with me and the two kids. Upon arriving in Utah, I was anxious to see all my aunts and uncles. I had seen many of them 6 weeks earlier at my cousin's wedding in Dallas. So they had already met our new baby. I have always enjoyed spending time with our extended family. My grandparents, Graham and Da, had driven in their RV to the location of the wedding. When they travel anywhere, they use the opportunity to make a cross-country vacation out of it by taking scenic back road routes in their RV and arriving at their destination using their vehicle as a traveling hotel. Although the wedding was taking place in their home state of Utah, they didn't miss the opportunity for all the family to convene together in their RV. I remember how my aunts oohed and awed over little Aubrey. Characteristically, my mom wanted to hold him right away. Not considering how her words might offend me, she blatantly asked, "What is wrong with his eyes?" I remember it like it was yesterday. "What do you mean, what's wrong with his eyes?" I had asked. I had seen Aubrey every day since he was born. Therefore, I never noticed a change in his eyes. To me, they had always moved in the fashion that they were now. There had never been a difference in his eye movement that I had noticed from one day to the next. "Why are they moving like that?" she questioned. "He's looking at everything. He always does that," I said. I was a bit annoyed with the questioning, implying that something was wrong. My mom continued, that is not right. His eyes are not supposed to be doing that. They weren't doing that at Megan's wedding. When did this start?" Now, turning to others, she asked, "Do you all remember Aubrey's eyes moving like this at Megan's wedding?" She proceeded to ask everyone who was gathered with Graham and Da in the RV. I was beginning to feel a bit flustered. She didn't even know what she was talking about, but she just kept asking me questions about his eyes. "He has always moved his eyes like that. He loves to look around," I said. She persisted, "I don't think he was doing that at Megan's wedding. You don't see that?" "Mom," I said, "I see them moving. That is how he has always moved his eyes." This was the first time anyone had brought up any concern about the movement of Aubrey's eyes. I was annoyed that my mom wouldn't let it go. Why was she saying something was wrong with Aubrey's eyes? Surely, if that was the case, I would know, or his doctor would have said something. I don't remember anyone else chiming in, worried over the movement of Aubrey's eyes. Many of my aunts were together with us in the RV, and my mom was openly voicing her concern. They all saw Aubrey, so looking back, I assume they had all noticed. I think they must have not wanted to upset me. Obviously, it had been said to me that there was movement in Aubrey's eyes. What more could be done? Soon we went our separate ways in preparation for the wedding ceremony. The ceremony was to be held outdoors. The location was garden-like with large rolling hills covered in green grass and dispersed with various walking paths that were lined with flowers, plants, fountains, and swings. It was beautiful. The guest seating was arranged on one such grassy area that was the most level. A brick walkway led downhill to the seating and would be where the wedding attendants and eventually the bride herself would walk through until she reached a place in the grassy expanse where she would say her vows. As the ceremony began, I took in the beautiful setting. I could see the ceremony from where I stood, yet I didn't sit with the other guests as I held my young son and did not want to be a distraction. Midway through the vows, I made my way the short distance over to the reception site as Aubrey was getting antsy, and I didn't want to cause a disturbance during this special time. I also had Havana with me. We had intended for her to participate in the ceremony as a flower girl, but while getting ready, I had accidentally burned her with a curling iron, and she hadn't emotionally recovered in time to make her appearance. I remember how unique the reception hall was. In keeping with the outdoor garden theme, it reminded me of a greenhouse. There were floor-to-ceiling windows. Actually, it would be more correct to say that all the walls and the ceiling of the structure were made of glass and simply connected to one another, adjoined by whatever small vertical piece of metal that connected each large window pane to the next. Inside the structure, there was lush tropical greenery and exotic, brightly colored flowers. Various fountains added to the ambiance as the hanging lanterns and lights reflected off of the water, and the sound of it flowing became a part of the peripheral noise. Looking up at the encapsulated ceiling, I saw that thick vines climbed up the entire structure, floor to ceiling, top to bottom. I was inside an indoor structure, yet there was thick, dense foliage that seemed like a mini rainforest. It was very moist inside and cool, not hot and uncomfortable. Holding Aubrey, I walked around the tables, and I reserved a place for myself to sit. It wasn't long before the crowd came teeming in, escaping the heat. Various family members filled in the table I was sitting at. Shortly after we had eaten dinner, my Aunt Catherine, who was a pediatrician in California, took a moment to pull me aside. We had our privacy. By nature, Catherine is a nurturer, kind, loving, giving, and soft-spoken. Softly and calmly she advised, "Vanessa, you really should take Aubrey to see the pediatrician when you get back." Immediately, I was alerted. This was not just someone spouting off random, unwarranted, ill-informed concerns. This was someone whose job was evaluating children's health, and she was telling me I needed to see our pediatrician. "What do you mean? We were just there for his 2-month checkup, and everything was perfect." That was what Aubrey's doctor had always told me. "Perfect? Your baby could not be more perfect." He would not have said that if there were any concerns. I pressed her further to find out exactly what was going through her mind. "Why? If there was something wrong, wouldn't the doctor have already told me?" I questioned. My aunt hadn't brought up any concern earlier that day when my mom had been grilling me in the RV. Likewise, I had dismissed all concern. No one else had been worried. It had just been my mom. But now, with my aunt pulling me aside, obviously she was concerned. Why should I have to take my son to a doctor? She was a doctor. If she knew something was wrong, she needed to tell me what it was. Why should I have to wait for a scheduled appointment? Suddenly, as I pressed her for information, sweet Catherine seemed to pull back and retreat. "Well, I just think it would be good for him to see his doctor. Do you go for regular checkups?" I felt attacked. Of course I take my kids for their regular checkups. I thought Aubrey had just had his 2-month checkup 4 weeks ago. "His eyes really shouldn't be moving like that, Vanessa. It's not natural," Catherine stated. "What do you mean, not natural? Come on, say what you mean," I thought. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "I mean, something is causing his eyes to move like that." "What do you mean, what's causing his eyes to move? Aubrey isn't making his own eyes move." Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't say. It could be anything. She was trying to back off again, to be dismissive, to make me go back to my doctor for answers, but I knew she had to know something. Otherwise, why prompt this discussion? Anything? Like what? What could it be? She knew something. She was a doctor and she was obviously concerned. I figured she wouldn't tell me all this if she didn't know something. They probably need to order an MRI and a CAT scan. It could be a tumor, something pressing in and causing the movement. It was surreal. Here I stood in the middle of beautiful fantasy-esque scenery, people dressed up, laughing and dancing. I was in the middle of joyous, spirited commotion, standing there talking to my aunt. All of my surroundings were suddenly out of place. I was out of place. I could not be here anymore. I needed to leave right then. I don't know in what outward emotional state I managed to leave that brief conversation, but I couldn't leave soon enough. As soon as I heard what I needed to hear, I wanted to get away. Let's see. Hold on a second here. Let's see where we are here. Yeah. I'm going to stop right there and finish up tomorrow with chapter 5. But now we can see that Vanessa has an idea that there's something wrong with Aubrey. So we'll listen tomorrow. We'll see what goes on, and we'll see what Vanessa does. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.